This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast with a host that has bronchitis. Yes, I am that host, Auburn Elvis. So this weekend I came down with bronchitis, had to miss the Auburn meet. I'm also on a bunch of pills, so we'll see how long my voice holds out. If you want to go and listen to another college equestrian podcast this week, I totally understand. Otherwise you're going to have to listen to a sick guy talk about some college equestrian. And let's see, first thing we're going to talk about are last week's meet recaps. First up, on Thursday, Texas A&M traveled to SMU. In my preview of this meet, I predicted it would be a 9-9 tie with SMU winning, and it ended up being a 9-9 tie with SMU winning. So not too bad for a guy who has bronchitis. Let's see how the meet went. Fences went 3-2 for A&M. Flat was 2-2 tie. Horsemanship went 3-2 to SMU. And reining was another 2-2 tie. That produced the 9-9 final score, and SMU got the edge in the tiebreaker. It was like 1,600 something to 1,500 something, so there you go. With a result that this close, both teams really have nothing to be ashamed of. Both teams should be pleased. Obviously, the winner will be a little bit more pleased, but A&M did very well on a tough road environment against the reigning national champions. I told you last week that some of the teams in the top tier are going to start picking up some losses. Well, this is A&M is the first one to do that, but this is not embarrassing at all, and they're still in that top tier. They were actually making a case going into this meet as being maybe the in the top two teams in the nation. And frankly, a top two team might have lost this meet. So don't place too much stock in the fact that they lost on the road like this. For SMU, now they get to rest and reset and get ready and do the same thing all over again with Auburn next week. So, also I do want to point out SMU had a perfect score sheet in this meet, so good job to the Mustangs there. The next meet to recap is on Friday, TCU at UT Martin. I said TCU would win this one 11-8 or maybe 8-9. 11-9. They won 12-7. In fences, the event ended with a 2-2 tie. Flat went 3-2 for TCU. Horsemanship is where TCU kind of put their foot down. They swept it 5-0. And then in reining, UT Martin actually won that 3-2. So, which is pretty good for anybody going up against TCU. Add that all up, the total was 12-7, like I said. Here again, we see UT Martin. They're going to give these highly ranked teams a little bit of trouble when they're at home there. They've had a heck of a difficult schedule so far, and they're not getting a lot of wins, but it's really, they played the toughest schedule of anybody. So they're going to be real battle tested once the meat of their ECAC season rolls around. This is going to benefit them. So for TCU, this was a sneaky, difficult road victory. They got it, and that's what you want. So also, I do want to point out that there was a score sheet error for UT Martin. They were missing the event total in horsemanship. Again, they did this thing where they put zeros for all the individual scores, but they didn't bother totaling all those zeros up, so they just left the thing blank. That's going to get deducted in the golden score sheet. We'll talk about that later. Then after that, TCU and Georgia took to the saddle in a 4-on-4 neutral site meet. I figured TCU would win this one about 11-8. And that was when I thought it was 5-on-5, and that translates probably down to something like 9-6. But TCU would end up winning 8-7. Here's how it all went. In fences, Georgia won 2-1. Flat went 2-2 for everybody. In horsemanship, TCU of course won. They swept it 4-0. And reining, Georgia won that 3-1. So again, we see somebody giving TCU some trouble in reining, but horsemanship is their bread and butter. Add that all up, that's your 8-7 victory for the Horned Frogs. TCU kind of probably took a point or two from Georgia on the flat or fences, and Georgia kind of did the same to them on reining, so that's kind of what you want. But really the big difference was TCU's dominance in horsemanship, so that powered them to victory. Here again, I think this is a good meet for both teams. I don't think Georgia should be ashamed of losing to TCU. TCU's the number one team. And again, TCU, they got pushed a little bit by Georgia, but it was a 4-on-4 meet, so those can always be weird. You never know how they're going to go exactly. So, also, UT Martin will lose another point in the golden score sheet because there was another error where they didn't, in that sweep in horsemanship again, they didn't add a zero or add all the zeros together. It's kind of sloppy, but you see that. So hopefully that'll get cleaned up. Now, let's see. Okay, also on Friday. Okay, yeah, this is a big one. South Carolina at Auburn. I didn't get to go to this one because I was sick. I don't know if I've mentioned that. I predicted Auburn would win 11-8. Auburn won 14-4. So, for some reason, I was a little worried that Auburn might slack off a little bit. I've been talking about how Auburn's Western can be up and down, and that's the way to beat Auburn. Well, that didn't happen. Here's how it went. Flat started off first, and normally Auburn does real well on this. Well, South Carolina won the flat 3-1. So right out of the gate, you think, oh my, this is going to be tough. Well, over in, what was it? Horsemanship? It was a 5-0 sweep. No, wait, no. It was raining. It was a 4-0 dirty sweep in raining. So Auburn gets that, ends up being up at the half. And then horsemanship happened. Auburn swept that 5-0. And then fences was 4-1 for Auburn. So after that initial win by South Carolina where they won the flat 3-1, they only got one more point the whole rest of the day. So Auburn really shut them down. And interestingly enough, the Western team did much better than the jumping seat team for Auburn. So good job to them. But I'll say good job to Carolina. They got some flat points from Auburn that were not expected. They showed that they could go into a very intimidating environment. Auburn has had won 33 straight home meets going into that. And they started out really strong. Now, of course, Auburn's host of All-Americans kind of wore them down eventually and got a bunch of points. But, South Carolina still, they a lot of respect to them. They went into a tough environment. They did very well. And again, we talked about it was a good day for Auburn, especially for the Western team. They showed me. I've been talking about how they've been up and down. Well, they were very up on Friday. Oh, and Auburn will lose a couple of points for their score sheets because they left some boxes blank, just like UT Martin's been doing. So that'll all get mentioned later. And now we're going to go over to Saturday. Georgia and UT Martin. They were the last meet of the week. I predicted this one was going to be a 9-9 tie with Georgia winning the tiebreaker. Apparently that was my thing last week. I did a lot of close meets predictions. This one ended up being 14-5 Georgia. So not very close. Again, let's see what. Fences went 4-1 for Georgia. Flat went 4-0 for Georgia. Horsemanship went 4-1 for Georgia. And reining went 3-1 for UT Martin. So UT Martin has a good reining squad. That's the one takeaway we can get from this weekend. Well, there's a lot of takeaways, but that's one you shouldn't, pass up. Now, this is a meet where UT Martin probably hoped they were going to do a little bit better because we had seen historically they do pretty well against these big squads. But again, after a while, there's only so much you can do when you're facing another team stacked with All-Americans. Georgia, they put the hammer down and they got a bunch of points. So, and like I said, the level of teams that UT Martin's going to face is going to start going down after this point. And it's going to get easier for the Skyhawks. So, they're not going to keep taking L's. At least they shouldn't. So, let's see. Oh, and the score sheet had another error in it. So UT Martin, boy, this was not a great weekend for the score sheets for, a bunch of people. So they're going to take another deduction there. And speaking of which, let's take a detailed look at the current Golden Score Sheet Awards. For those of you who don't know, the Golden Score Sheet Award is a competition where each week I review all the official score sheets and award deductions or bonus points based on the number of errors that I find, or if one brave team out there would just put the home team on the right of the score sheet as God intended. Every team begins the season with 100 points, and at the end of the season, the team or teams with the highest point totals will win an actual award from me commemorating their achievement in outstanding records keeping. So we all know UT Martin lost a bunch of points. Let's see how everybody else has done. In first place with a perfect 100 points are Berry College, Bridgewater, College of Charleston, Dartmouth, Lynchburg, Minnesota Crookston, Sacred Heart, Swanee, SMU, South Dakota State, Sweetbriar, and UC Davis. In 13th place with a score of 99 points are Fresno State, Georgia, Oklahoma State, and TCU. In 17th place with a score of 98 is Baylor. In 18th place with a score of 97 is Texas A&M and UT Martin. In 20th place with a score of 96 are Auburn and Delaware State. And in 22nd place with a score of 94 is South Carolina. Also, I got to point out that there are almost certainly going to be some teams like Berry, or maybe College of Charleston, who are not going to have home meets this season. So I'm going to take those teams out of the competition once we're certain that they're not hosting anything. That's going to happen next semester in the spring, because they're not turning in any score sheets. So you can't win the competition if you don't turn anything in. Okay, with that out of the way, now let's talk about Week 6 of the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. Now, this week is the first week where there's going to be a little bit of a disconnect between where a team is ranked and whether or not their body of work puts them in that one of those 3 tiers where I talk about the top tier, those teams that can win home and away. There's a second tier of the teams that can't really win away, they really just win at home. And then there's that bottom tier of teams that have trouble doing either. I point this out because there is one team in particular, SMU, that has no road wins, so they are not in that top tier yet, but because they just did beat a team from the upper tier, they are going to go up in the rankings, but they're not quite in that top tier like the team they just beat. It's a little weird. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. Okay, so the number 1 team is no surprise, TCU. They added to their resume with a road win over a tough UT Martin team and a neutral 4-on-4 victory over Georgia. TCU is the poster child for teams that can win home and away, and with the way that their schedule is laid out, it would be a shock to see them lose any meet between now and their final meet of the season, a road trip to SMU in March. They've got a great schedule for them laid out. They should be favored in everything up until that SMU meet. Number 2 team in the nation is no surprise, Auburn. I almost dropped the Tigers to number 3 last week, but they showed that they deserved to stay number 2 for a little bit longer. The home win over South Carolina was expected, but now their schedule is going to get a lot tougher. They take a week off, and then they're going to get ready for a grueling road trip to Texas A&M and then to SMU the very next day. And Auburn is also in that top tier, the group of teams that can win on the road, and we'll see if that continues. The number 3 team is SMU. The Mustangs climb back up the rankings a little bit with that narrow home win over Texas A&M. SMU does not have a road victory yet this season, so they're not in that top tier of teams that have proven they can win on the road. Even still, they have proven that they can win at home, and that puts them in the top of that second tier that we just talked about. So the Mustangs are 3rd this week. The number 4 team is Texas A&M. The Aggies barely lost on the road at SMU, and while that doesn't exactly hurt their resume, it does take away from what it could have been. Ironically, their previous win at Oklahoma State qualifies them to still remain in that top tier of teams, like I talked about, that can get those wins on the road. So the Aggies are still in a top tier, even though they drop down below a team that is not in the top tier. It's a little confusing, but it'll all work itself out over time. The number 5 team is Georgia. Georgia barely lost a neutral roadside meet against the number 1 team, and then they took care of business on the road against UT Martin. Georgia is a solid home team with 3 losses all coming on the road or at that neutral site that I just talked about. And those were all to top tier teams. All right, number 6 is Oklahoma State. Yeehaw! The Cowgirls didn't ride this week, but the team previously above them did and lost, so we're going to have a little bit of flip-flop here in the rankings. Also, some of you people may be tempted to sneak Oklahoma State up above Georgia, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know if the NCEA has a random drug testing policy, but if you put Oklahoma State above Georgia in your rankings, you don't need to be drug tested because I know you are smoking dope. There is no way you can look at these 2 teams' resumes and say that Oklahoma State deserves to be higher ranked than Georgia. So, yes, someone in this conversation is high, and it ain't Oklahoma State. Okay, the number 7 team this week is South Carolina. The Gamecocks became the Tigers' latest home victim, but at this point, literally every dual discipline team in the country, and I mean it, every dual discipline team in the country, except for Minnesota Crookston, has lost at Auburn in this 5-year-long home winning streak that they've got going. So, while it will drop them down 1 spot this week in the rankings, that's okay. The Gamecocks, you're going to end the fall hosting Oklahoma State anyway, so that meet right there will settle who's better between you 2 teams. Okay, the number 8 team is Delaware State. like Don Quixote, I am going to keep charging at windmills, defending the Hornets' honor until a team comes along and proves that they are not the 8th best team in the country. And in 3 weeks, Baylor and UT Martin are going to get that chance, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, so now after number 8, this is where things get kind of weird. Poor UT Martin, they have had the toughest opening schedule of anybody in the country. They've actually done pretty well with it, all things considered, but they're 1-5. Those 5 have come on the road to number 5 and number 7, and they've come at home to number 1, number 2, and number 5. So their record and stats have taken a beating while other teams around them have been idle. So I would love to keep them at number 9, but this ain't equitation over feeling, so I got to go by the stats. So that means that our new number 9 team is UC Davis. Hello, you. Sometimes being idle is the winning play, and the Aggies are winning right now in that they're not losing. So their stats look better than UT Martin's right now, so they get the number 9 spot. That's basically what's happening. And at number 10, we have UT Martin. Like I said, the Skyhawks, they may have been on the losing end a lot of score lines lately, but they are still better in the stats than teams like Baylor and Fresno State, or South Dakota State, or Minnesota Crookston. So hang in there, Skyhawks. All your hard work, it's going to get rewarded, I promise you, but for right now, you did drop down. So those are the top 10 dual discipline teams. There were no single discipline results. I'm still going to give you those rankings, but my voice is starting to go out, so I'm going to go through these really quickly. Number 1 is Lynchburg. Number 2 is Dartmouth. Number 3 is Sweetbriar. Number 4 is Berry College. Number 5 is Sacred Heart. Number 6 is Bridgewater. Number 7 is Swanee. And number 8 is the College of Charleston. All right, here we go. Now we're going to look into the future and see what we have upcoming this week in our meet previews. Again, I'm fading here a little bit, so I'm going to just kind of go through these quickly. Sorry about that. I don't normally get these correct much anyway, so it's okay if I pare these down. Thursday is Fresno State at Baylor, so somebody has to win this. It's in the rules. I think it's going to be Baylor. Sorry, Bulldogs. In the spring, you're going to get them in Fresno, and that'll be your best chance to win. Okay, next, on Friday, Fresno State at Oklahoma State. Cowgirls by 1,000,000. Texas A&M at South Carolina. Now this is interesting. The Gamecocks have a decent shot at the upset. I still think A&M wins by about 3 or 4, but Carolina could prove me wrong here. Minnesota Crookston at South Dakota State. Jackrabbits by 1,000,000. Next one, College of Charleston at South Carolina. Finally, we get to see our newest NCEA member in the saddle. The Gamecocks aren't the toughest jumping seat team in the nation, but they're going to get at least 7 points here. So, yeah, I think it's going to be 7 if it's an 8-point meet, or 9 if it's a 10-point, and maybe the Cougars will get 1 point. That's my prediction. Then, on Saturday, we have UC Davis at Minnesota Crookston at the neutral site meet. I think that's going to be Aggies by 2,000,000. UC Davis then turns around and they're going to ride against South Dakota State. This one's actually a pretty big meet here. I'm going to say UC Davis wins by about 4. Then we have a single discipline meet with Bridgewater at Sacred Heart. I have Sacred Heart above Bridgewater in the rankings, so I'm going to say that Sacred Heart wins this. Probably by about 3. Then on Sunday, Bridgewater is going to go over to number 2 Dartmouth. Good luck there, because I think that's going to be a big green win by about 2. And that's all of this week's previews. So very exciting stuff coming up. Okay, so if you made it to the end of this, you are the real meaning of Christmas, and you're the friends we found along the way. Thank you for listening to this. Normally I will end the show with some sort of soapbox issue, but I'm just going to tell you that I'm on a ton of pills right now, and I kind of have a headache, and boy, this is not fun. So don't get sick, y'all. That's my soapbox issue. Hope you're feeling better than I am. That's all for this episode. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Well, thank you very much for listening, and War Horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.